Okay, so I'd also like to take a moment to briefly introduce our folks on the screen and the folks that will be speaking to us about their work this evening. We have Elizabeth Scrafford, who is the Western Regional Field Director at Sierra Club, and she uses she, her pronouns, as well as Eve Brady, who is an organizer with Sunrise Movement DC chapter, and they use they, them pronouns. So our featured guests will be talking to us about the work that they're doing with their respective organizations, how they're advancing climate and environmental justice and action within their work, and ways for you all to plug in and take action. And as I mentioned, we'll also have space at the end of the call for Q&A. So if you have questions for them that come up while they're talking, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box. I also want to go over a few housekeeping items real quick before we get started. So as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it's going to be live streamed to our YouTube channel. The Q&A and chat functions are available to you all to use throughout the call, but please only use the Q&A function for questions and not for comments. Otherwise, it just gets really too much and it's really hard to parse through when we need to find questions for our panelists. So please only use that for questions. And then also please be mindful of your language in the chat. We do have people monitoring the chat for any trollish behavior. So if we see anything inappropriate, we will have to remove you. So please just be respectful. I also have some community agreements. Kim, if you could drop those in the chat, that would be great for you all to review. If you all could just take a moment to look at those. And the main thing is just remembering that this is a learning space. And so I ask that you all please be respectful of our panelists and each other. So that is it for housekeeping. And before I pass it to our panelists, I want to talk briefly about the intersections of the climate movement and other social justice spaces, because I know a lot of you are probably wondering, well, what does the climate have to do with women's rights or to fight for gender equality? And the answer is everything, because everything is interconnected. So a little bit of background though, marginalized communities, especially women from marginalized communities, often bear the brunt of climate change through several different things, right? Displacement, resource scarcity, increased caregiving responsibilities, food and water insecurity, and the list goes on and on. But they typically tend to experience more climate and environmental injustice disproportionately. And the same systems of oppression that perpetuate gender inequality and fuel environmental exploitation are the same ones, excuse me, and the extractive economy. So we're thinking like the fossil fuel industry prioritizes profit over people's well-being, and corporate interests that fight against environmental regulations are often the same ones opposing things like workplace protections for women. So we can see here how patriarchal power structures and environmental exploitation share common roots in unchecked capitalism. And this is why it's so important for us to be thinking about these issues intersectionally, because we need to find solutions that are going to address all of these problems, right? So that's all I will say to just kind of set the tone for this evening. And now I would love to pass it off to our speakers, starting with Elizabeth Scrafford from the Sierra Club. So Elizabeth, if you just want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work you're doing, that would be great. And then I'll jump into some of the questions that we discussed. Oh, I think Elizabeth, you're on mute. Does it work? Hang on one
Hi.
second. Okay, now? Okay.
Hello, friends. Thank you for being patient. I was master muted. I did not even know that that was a term, but I think that that was what was happening. I was trying and appreciate folks who were commenting in the chat. It's so nice to be with you tonight. And Malika, what you said about this being interconnected is why I first got into the climate movement. I come from North Idaho. My dad's family is from a place called Smelterville, and I always like to remind people or invite you to use your imagination when you think of a town called Smelterville and what a town like that might look like. It is now, and it's in North Idaho, up in the mountains closer to Montana, and now that part of the country is overrun with tourism. But when I was a little girl, it was silver mines. And it had a lot of sulfur dioxide pollution. And when I was born, my family moved back to my dad's hometown. And we lived there until my little brother Stephen was born. And it's where my dad started welding when he was in high school. And it's where my grandpa and his brothers worked. And like many American families, you know, they worked in the town that they were from. And it was where everyone worked. And then the EPA shut the silver mines down because of the pollution. And that is what eventually brought me into the climate movement, was my desire to do something about corporations that harm communities. And what we've seen, many of us who come from towns like this, what I've seen over the last 11 years of working at Sierra Club is that Smelterville is not a standalone town. It's one of many towns. And so Sierra Club, I joined the organizing program at Sierra Club 11 years ago, working in downstate Illinois, and started working on Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign because it was the place I saw where there was something to do with my rage at corporations. And I wanted to hold big coal accountable. It was the closest thing I could find at that point in my life to wanting to hold corporations accountable. And I wanted to bring clean energy online. So that's what I did. I started working in small communities downstate Illinois to work on the transition from something really dirty to something clean. And I've been doing that for the last 11 years. I worked my way up in the organization and now am working to run Sierra Club's field program, where we have 64 chapters in the Sierra Club working all across the country as we continue to not just bring clean energy online, but get people outside and continue to build the movement, because we know it's not just the environment, right? There's a lot more to do besides just shutting down corporations. And for me personally, it's always thinking about what's happening in small towns. And in Helena, Montana, Natalie, is like such a beautiful place, and also a community with a story to tell. Sorry, my little ADHD brain sees comments and goes right there. Anyways, I would love to hear how you came to Sunrise Movement, so I'm going to stop talking. And yeah, Sun Valley. Hi, friend. Hi, Paige.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think we'll continue on with you, and then we'll move to Eve. Thanks for sharing that backstory. And I just, especially those small towns, I really feel for them a lot because they're so vulnerable. And when we talk about intersectional movements between climate and race and the economy and gender, I really think about the economy and climate a lot, because a lot of those small towns have been taken advantage of, especially in like coal country. You know, there's so much false promise for people who are struggling, who thought, okay, this is the way to go. This is the only way. This is how I can build, you know, wealth for my community. And it's just such a lie. It's such a farce, and it's caused cancer and illness and so many other things. So I feel that 100%. And now I'm going on a tangent. So let's continue on with you, Elizabeth. So I'd love to know in what ways have recent threats or actions from the Trump administration affected the momentum toward clean energy and the broader climate and environmental efforts?
Okay, there we go. It happened again for just a second. Yeah, so I think this false promise comes in such a big way from the Trump administration. We're all seeing it, what feels like a daily basis, when it's like the Republican controlled Congress and really the tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations is what we're seeing. And it's the funds getting frozen for funding climate disaster relief, for gutting clean energy programs, for all of the folks that are getting laid off from our national park staff. You know, we've seen I think that the resistance rangers rising up across the country in protest. It is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is Biden's landmark climate legislation that would infuse millions of dollars into jumpstarting the clean energy economy. And really, this is the sort of legislation that so many communities have been waiting for, because it would finally put money back into communities that have been waiting for investment. That sort of investment is on the chopping block. And the question is, like right now, which parts of the law will have enough support to survive and which will not? And I think what we're seeing as Americans kind of rise up and sound the alarm in town halls across the country is what is Congress going to respond the most to, as folks are starting to understand, okay, I can't just wipe this all away. So the IRA is already growing a clean energy economy. It's building domestic manufacturing that will equip America to compete globally. It's cleaning up air and water pollution, especially in low-income communities. It's cutting household energy costs in every region in the country. And, you know, just earlier this week, it makes me nutty, but Trump's EPA administrator Lee Zeldin announced his plan to roll back 31 different environmental regulations that protect our health, our air, and our water in such a devastating way, in such a cavalier way. This announcement was made as if these protections are not saving people's lives, as if these protections are not the thing that has like made it possible for kids to go outside and play during school. Some of the folks who work with me at Sierra Club talk about, you know, growing up in LA and having to come in on bad air days on LA playgrounds. You know, folks who work at the Sierra Club, some of us come from small towns in the mountains, some of us come from big cities, and we talk about what's the thing that brought you into the environmental movement. And for many of us, like, we saw something happen and we wanted to make a change. So when we think of these laws that have been protecting our community and have made a difference for the thing that turned the plug, right? The silver mines in Smelterville, Illinois would still be running if it weren't for the EPA stopping them when I was a little girl. And what I always tell people is, like, no one got out of Smelterville healthy. The creek at the end of H Street on my grandma's street, the last time I was there 6 years ago, was gated off because it's toxic. That's the creek I played in as a little girl. Like, you think of clean air and clean water alerts, like, it's all this stuff. And our kids, right? Our kids can't be breathing this air. So it breaks my heart when I think of the cost of this, because we have too many families that can't afford health insurance, who can't, you know, and it is in so many ways, so many people are at risk. And it's the folks that are most vulnerable, that can't afford to get to the hospital, that can't afford their medication, that can't afford food. What are those families going to do? Anyways, I can just keep going on my pedestal because I feel so strongly about this, but I'm trying to rein myself back.
No, I totally get it, Elizabeth. This is what got me involved in environmental work as well. That's why I'm doing a doctorate in environmental health, because
Mm.
that's something we don't think about a lot of the time. Like, people can't already afford to be unhealthy from all the other ways that the government poisons us, right? Through poor food regulations, allowing chemicals in our water and our food, what have you. And on top of that, you've got to worry about, you know, the outside exposed zone and getting hit by air pollution or other things from like industrial farming operations. So it is really, it's hard. It's hard. And there's so many ways that I just feel like we're being failed. So I get it. And there's a lot of people in the chat that I see that are resonating, that are talking about environmental justice, that maybe come from environmental justice communities as well. And so to see what the Trump administration is doing when we already have so many problems and we're already at a tipping point climate wise is just, it's very scary. So I hear all of you in the chat. So I wanted to know, Elizabeth, if you could talk a little bit more to how Sierra Club is strategizing to fight back. Like, what's the strategy right now, considering all of these potential rollbacks that you just mentioned?
Yeah, one of the benefits of working at such a large organization is we've got so many smart folks at Sierra Club. We've got the legal team, we've got the lobbyists, and our legal team last week filed a lawsuit with partner organizations against Doge over the unjustified mass firing of park staff. So that's one of the many things that we're doing. We're trying to work and build the movement. Things like this right now. We know that it's, we're not alone and that this is going to take a groundswell of people that are rising up. And so we're really trying to think of like, whose hand are we holding? Whose arm are we linking as we're trying to sound the alarm on the awful actions that the Trump administration is taking? And we're trying to organize our members. Sierra Club has a large membership base. We're trying to keep them updated with what's happening at the federal level. And to do that, we're hosting monthly action hours for thousands of attendees. And it's a way that busy and overwhelmed people can gather to join us and stay informed about what the administration is doing and how they can take action against them. And then I will say, there is a lot of really bad stuff happening at the federal level. And one thing that we're trying to remind people of in this heartbreaking moment is that we also have options at the local level where we can take the fight local. And win clean energy fights at the state and municipal level where we may not always have a winning streak at the federal level. Like we're going to keep fighting and we're not going to give up the fight there. And we're also going to be looking for those wins at the state and local level at the same time.
That's an excellent point, Elizabeth. I think it's so important for people to realize that states, for now, still have power. Local municipalities still have power. And Trump is a symptom, right? It's not just Trump, but even before Trump, there were challenges on the environmental side and with regulations. And so a lot of environmental groups have been always using state power to advance their initiatives. And there's so many examples we could talk about. In the interest of time, we won't go into them, unfortunately, but I wonder, Elizabeth, you talked a little bit about, can you rename the action hours that you were discussing? I wonder if there are other opportunities for folks to get involved, and if you have any other advice for how folks can be plugging into whether it's Sierra
Yeah.
Club's actions or just more broadly.
I'm going to drop a link. We're asking people related to our Doge lawsuit, we're asking people to send a message to Congress about why it's important to stand up and support national parks. Kim just dropped it in. Thanks, Kim. If you take action with us, you will get on our email list. We are posting our action hours. It's very easy to join Sierra Club's community. We want you to be a part of us. And if no matter where you are in the country, the way we work, we have chapters, and underneath chapters, we have groups. So I live in Chicago right now. I used to live downstate in Illinois. There are 14 different groups of Sierra Club. And that means in Springfield and Alton and Champaign and Urbana, all over in Waukegan, no matter where you're at. And so I see there's folks from all over the country. There is a chapter in Alabama. There sure is, Rachel. There's chapters all over the country, and we would love to get you plugged in with us. So I would say take action online to join our list. And we have organizers who are following up with people. I would invite you to do a little Google search for your local chapter. I will drop my email and invite you to email me, which is a wild offer on a night like tonight, but I would love to follow up with you. And you can, if I can get you connected with the folks in Alabama, Rachel. We have, what was I going to say? Yeah, 64 chapters. The chapters are really a way that we also like Sierra Club's mission is explore, enjoy, protect. So we're trying to take people outside on hikes, especially in this moment when the world feels honestly scary and it feels like a lot is going on. We are across the country. I think our Angeles chapter, a couple days after the election, they were taking people outside hiking. Like, let's connect with nature. Let's remember why we're doing this. We're holding, last night, one of our chapters or one of our groups in Illinois was holding a public education night on what's happening with the Mississippi River. On a monthly basis, Sierra Club groups across the country are holding education events about local issues, and they're taking people outdoors. We're trying to, stop coal plants and pipelines and bring clean energy online. We're trying to bring more public infrastructure when it comes to like buses in places like Minneapolis. We're doing so many good things, and we would love to have you as a part of our community. And it's so nice to be with you tonight. I'm loving watching the chats roll through and seeing the good things you all are doing where you are.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I love that recommendation. And it's a wonderful way to stay grounded right now with everything that's going on, getting outside, going on those hikes, forest bathing, or whatever it is that folks are calling it these days. Just connect with nature as much as you can. So now I would love to pass it over to Eve from Sunrise Movement. Eve, if you want to talk a little bit about, okay, great. You were able to unmute. So if you want to maybe introduce yourself again and talk a little bit about what you do at Sunrise Movement, and then I'll kick it off with some questions.
Great. Well, first, I just want to say I'm going to start saying forest bathing all the time. That's going to be like my new favorite phrase, and everyone's going to be sick of it. But yes, happy to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Eve. I'm a member or an organizer with Sunrise DC. I got involved with Sunrise just actually right after the main piece of the pandemic. I was feeling really disheartened. It was very hard to organize, at least for me. I was living in North Carolina in a very rural place, and also just noticing horrible things happening left and right, and had no one to talk to about them. So I reached out to my friend Rosewater, who was leading Sunrise DC at the time, and they said, dude, why aren't you organizing? Like, it'll make you feel so much better. Um, like, you're someone who likes talking to people. Organize again. You'll feel hopeful again. And they're smart. They were right. And I got involved with Sunrise. And it was actually joining Sunrise that showed me how climate intersected with these different issues. I didn't quite like I had been so focused on police brutality, on drug policy, and I hadn't realized that just every single one of us in every demographic is touched by climate change. Um, and it was the people in Sunrise who showed me you don't have to think about one thing alone. It can be all of these things as they connect to one another. And I just have been organizing with Sunrise ever since.
Awesome, Eve. Thank you. So I'm sure folks on this call have heard about the Green New Deal, and sometimes it can be a little bit daunting. Folks don't really understand what that is, what some of the principles are, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about the Green New Deal, what, what the current state is, with the work, considering the administration that we're living under. Yeah, if you could just start there, that would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, yeah, I think the Green New Deal has can be kind of confusing. Right now, it is not like a particular bill. It's more of a framework for like a vision toward building toward a better future. And that vision includes clean air, clean water, as well as building a more equitable society. But really, the four basic tenets of a Green New Deal are stopping climate change by moving our economy to run on 100% clean energy, which is something that we can do and choose not to do. Um, the second is creating millions of good paying green union jobs. The third one is investing in racial and economic justice. And I think you actually touched on this, Malika, but I think it's really important to name that there is an important intersection between climate change and socioeconomic inequality, and that it is working class Black and brown people who are impacted by climate change, who already are impacted and will continue to be impacted. And then the last one is reimagining our government to work for everyday people. Right now, it obviously isn't, and it ought to be. And then just to give a little bit of history, the reason why we call it the Green New Deal is to liken us to the New Deal that FDR put in place, which was just a massive, honestly, redesign of our economy. a radical change to the American economy. And that's just something that we need right now. We need a radical change in a climate lens.
That's awesome, Eve. Thank you so much for that explanation. And I want folks to think about that a little bit more because I'm sure questions will come up. I already saw a question earlier when Elizabeth and I were talking about coal country and like the false promise of these jobs. And someone I think posed a question about, well, I grew up in a similar kind of county and while those things are toxic, yes, they provided jobs and some economic stability. So maybe you could answer that question when the Q&A time rolls around. Um, but moving on, I'd love to know, and I think you maybe spoke about this a little bit, but if you want to talk a little bit more about how the Sunrise Movement specifically and the work on advancing some of these principles, how has that advanced the fight for clean energy and climate justice?
Yeah, I feel like right now we're in, I'd call it a building stage. Um, Sunrise DC in particular has a goal toward building toward the general strike of 2028. And I really want to give a little bit of context about the general strike. For anyone who's not familiar, UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, actually just after their big victories in 2023, called for all unions across the country to align toward a general strike in 2028. The United States hasn't had a successful general strike in decades. It's been like maybe 50 or 60 years. And to give context on what that could achieve, like we got the weekend because of a general strike. Like Canada got their universal health care because of a general strike. And because of that goal, I think we have an opportunity to actually achieve a lot of these bigger victories that I think feel so far away right now. Like the one thing I didn't answer when you asked was, where is the reality of a Green New Deal right now? And the reality is a little bleak. Like we're getting further away from like that beautiful green future we could imagine because of the cuts to these different important departments, like because of the EPA cuts, because we've cut basically all federally funded biological sciences, um, including research on pollinators, the Forestry Service, like all of those different things. We're unfortunately getting just further away because of that. The right is just so well organized right now, and I think what we need to do as the left is get to that place of well organized majorities so that we can win radical change.
Yeah, that's an excellent response, Eve. And yeah, unfortunately, the right is very, very well organized, and they've co-opted a lot of our tactics. And you know what? They won, and they continue to win, unfortunately. But we are going to continue to fight back. So I would love to move on, Eve. The Sunrise Movement, a lot of time when people think about Sunrise Movement, a lot of people think immediately like youth. There's so many incredible youth, including yourself, that are driving that movement. And so I'd love if you could share a little bit more about why it's important for youth to be involved in climate action.
Yeah, absolutely. To put it plainly, it's going to be young people who are living in the future that we create today. Like, and is that future going to be clean? Are they going to have water to drink? Are they going to have creeks to play in? Like right now, that doesn't seem likely. But we can take action to moving in the other direction. And I think because young people are noticing that is going to be their future, already we see young people doing something about it, noticing these are not actions that I took, but I'm going to have to live with them. And that is a big reason why I think young people have to be at the forefront of this conversation. And honestly, people much younger than me, like even people who are teenagers, folks who haven't even lived 2 decades, are fighting this fight and haven't don't have higher education, like they haven't finished high school. Um, so I think that that's the main reason why I think young people have to be at the forefront of this. It's going to be their future.
Yeah, Thank you. And we kind of don't have a choice, right? Because that's going to be the reality. So, climate apathy or indifference, continuing destructive behaviors, it serves no one at the end of the day. I think that for a long time, people thought, it was just, developing economies, developing countries that really deal with the harsh realities of climate change. But now you've got climate-induced storms and disasters that are hitting a lot of wealthy areas as well. I mean, even just looking at the LA fires and how many rich people's homes and mansions they destroyed on top of smaller marginalized communities as well. But it's coming for all of us. And so those folks also have to think, what about my future generations, or like that brand Seventh Generation or whatever. Every time I buy one of their products, I think, oh yeah, like we do have to be thinking 7 generations ahead, because what are we leaving them to inherit, right? And so my final question for you, Eve, is what are some practical steps or opportunities for people to engage in that you believe can help build resilience against the policies that are currently threatening our climate?
Yeah. Looking big picture, I'm just noticing a lot of people in the chat going like, all right, I'm convinced. What do I do? What do I do now? And I love that energy. The folks here watching this call are activists. Like these people, you guys are the people who notice things are wrong and want to do something about that. Um, I will say, I think the next best step to making sure that we can make foundational change, especially if folks want to align with that general strike in 2028, is organizing folks who don't already agree with everything that we're saying, like folks in our communities who go to our churches, folks who are in our workplaces, people who probably do see that things are bad, but like don't believe in their power yet. They don't know that by joining together, we can make these real changes. In order to make radical foundational change, we're going to need majorities. And that's why in these next couple of years, we have like that opportunity to build up those majorities to make those foundational changes. So that's not very specific. I do want to say Sunrise does have a couple of events I would love to invite folks to. In particular, there is a rally for the EPA tomorrow in DC. I saw there were a couple of folks in DC and Maryland, and you're welcome to join that. We absolutely want you there. And then for anyone who would like to hear more about the general strike, which I think everyone can participate in, we have the opportunity over the next few years to organize our workplaces and our schools and our students. And I wanted to make sure, I'm going to put this in the chat for Kim. I don't think I gave you this one. Oh, maybe I did. There, never mind. It's right there. Great. So those are the two events I wanted to make sure folks could have access to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eve. And for folks who are worried about like losing track of all of the links, I know there's a lot happening in the chat. I will send a follow-up email with all the links that the panelists have spoken about this evening and any additional resources that they want to share as well. So now I'd love to move us into our Q&A session. We have a little bit over 20 minutes left. So I want y'all to get the most out of this time. And I saw a question that I flagged from Dakota, going back to the coal mine discussion that we were having earlier. Dakota says they're from a tiny coal mine town. The pollution and environmental destruction is not great, but it provides jobs, so locals cling to it. Would love to hear about energy alternatives and jobs. Whoever wants to answer, or you can both
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
answer that question.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a, it's hard because personally, the question I wrestle with is how good are the jobs when the jobs make us sick? And I feel this deep in my bones because what happens in coal country is that there is a degradation of the land and the community. And often what we see with these companies is that they're only interested in operating businesses until the land gives out or they're forced to shut down. And it is not a long-term investment. It's an investment that is very short-lived. And I think what is so hard in so many small towns is that there is something that is hoped for, that business will meet the need of community and that business will be more caring, right? Because in small towns, folks that come from small towns know neighbors look out for neighbors and that they are counting on a corporation to be a good neighbor. And corporations that are doing things like polluting your water with sulfur dioxide pollution, right? We know coal has things like mercury and arsenic and heavy metals. Any sort of corporation that's willing to use you as a sacrifice zone or put your water and your air or the future of your water at risk doesn't really care for your community. And often what we see happening at the same time these companies are hurting the land is that they are also trying to figure out the least amount they can pay for their taxes. So I'll give an example of a coal plant. What we see often with coal plants is that they are sometimes propping up a community in taxes, but what we'll see is the coal company that's willing to shut down is where they're willing to shut down is where they're paying the most in taxes because they want to keep the plants running where they're paying a least amount. And this is like, you know, it is a tough pill to swallow because we want to think of these folks as good neighbors, but it is corporate greed at its finest. And so I think that it is really hard because sometimes we know folks, and sometimes this for me feels very personal because I think of my dad. My dad's a welder. He's retired now, right? My people are blacksmiths and silver miners. That's where I come from. What I know is that the people who do blue collar work are good people and that it is never the fault of the worker who's just trying to feed their family, right? It is often the folks who are looking to cut corners and who are purposefully trying to think of how do we do this for less? And when they're thinking about how do we do this for less, they are not caring about our health or our community. And so this is a really tough thing when we think about small towns. And what I like to remember is that another future is possible. What Eve was talking about, another future is possible. We used to paint our walls with lead paint, and now we know we don't have to do that. And so we know that we can power our homes with different type of power, and we know that we can take our energy load and we can reduce it through energy efficiency, and we know that we can continue to rely on smarter systems. And so our systems of energy will continue to get cleaner because the youth are going to keep getting smarter and telling us, hey, there's a better way to do it. We can extract less from the earth. We can be recycling and reducing and reusing. And that is the path that we should all be on. And right now, what we can be doing is using wind and solar energy, and we can be increasing energy efficiency to reduce our loads. So that's what I would say for those communities that are struggling is like, yes, our money has come from coal, but at what cost? And often the cost has been very, very high. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
But you're right.
Go ahead, Eve.
Yeah, that's just very well said. The only thing I would add is that I think that the corporations that are pushing us toward fossil fuels in this way are often engaging, or almost always engaging in propaganda, which no one is immune to. One great thing about the Green New Deal and Green New Deal bills is that there is a focus on green jobs. Like the just transition toward renewable energy will create jobs. So that doesn't mean that all communities that are currently relying on solar will be completely out of options. Like there is things to build, and this world that we need to get to is going to take a lot of work. So I don't think where anyone's going to be out of a job.
Yeah, important note, Eve. Thank you. So I'm seeing a few more questions in the Q&A box. Angela asked, what is a good strategy to talk to people who say that the climate is cyclical and climate change is a hoax, that things we do don't have an effect on climate change.
I'll give a little thing, and then I'm very curious about what Elizabeth says. I often have to point toward one's own experiences. Like, notice the things that are happening in your life. Notice the things that happened in your mother or your grandmother's life. Like, my mother would often talk to me about how there used to be bugs on our windshield. There are just less bugs now. Like, and that's true. Like, there is scientific evidence that there is just less bugs, less pollinators. And these are things that have happened so quickly, it's shocking. Like, there used to be snow for 2 months, and now maybe you get a crazy snow. Like little things like that, I think start making people notice that their world looks differently than it used to. And it's not about being cyclical, it's about something that has drastically changed. Not that helpful, but
I think that's helpful though. I will admit that I come from a family that doesn't believe in climate change. So this resonates for me in that what I have found is with folks that don't want to talk to me about climate change, I talk about personal responsibility and I talk about stewardship and I talk about pollution. And whether or not people believe in climate change, they often can see the impact of pollution. And people remember rivers being on fire. They remember smog. They remember. So if they think that climate change is cyclical, what they often can reflect on, if they can't see that, is they can say, oh, we have been cleaning up the air and that has been better for us. I used to have smog days at school and have to come in. Oh, yes, this thing used to be dirtier and now it's cleaner. And so where we're seeing the impacts of climate, right, are harmful, what we're seeing at the same time is the benefit of the clean air and clean water regs. And so I have that conversation with people and talk about like how we're supposed to, from my faith background, how we're supposed to be stewards is the conversation I have. And for me personally is like, I try to save my breath and figure out where my arguments are and where it doesn't make sense to argue with people because they don't actually want to have a good-hearted conversation. And I think that, Eve, to what you said of like, who are we going to be able to organize in turn and who just wants to argue for the sake of argument, I think is such a tricky thing sometimes to try to figure out of like, we need more people in the movement and sometimes people just want to stir up a fight too. So that's a tricky judgment call some days.
And I'll just add one thing here because I'm really passionate about climate change communications. I find that sometimes finding common denominator with communities, I've had to work a lot with, little red bubbles here and there. And usually the thing that gets them is like the health of their children, helping them understand, talking more about health and how, just the whole field of climate and environmental health specifically and how that's impacting people on an individual and communal level is really important. And I tend to see that work, it takes time, but usually it does move people into more concern or action. We have a few more questions. There's someone here. This is a timely question. I'm from Eastern Washington, where we have insane wildfires. Can you explain how climate change exacerbates natural disasters? It's a really good question.
Elizabeth, would you like to take that one?
Sure, I will answer the question, but also say I'm not a scientist. So I will give you my rudimentary understanding, which is we are seeing more extreme weather events, right? We're seeing less rain, wildfires, Eastern Washington, I'm thinking Wenatchee, Spokane, that sort of neck of the woods. And the wildfires in that part of the country have been bad. And we're seeing, hotter summers that are having less dry spells. We're seeing, or more dry spells, less rain happening. And we're seeing, I think with climate science, what I understand is that the extremeness of of the weather will just keep rising, and there will be more the dry spells will stretch and be further and further apart. The strength of the wind will increase, right? Everything that is scary will get scarier. Um, which sucks. There was, the week of the California wildfires, if you were looking at all of the weird weather things that were happening that week across the US, was pretty terrifying. We were having fires in California, wild wind in Alaska, power outages because our grid couldn't handle the cold in Texas. And so as a country, right, we can't handle the spikes in our climate and the way that they're happening and the bad storms. Yep. So that's my rudimentary understanding. Eve, if you got something better, I would love to hear, or different, I should say, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm also not a scientist, but I can say one of the things that has made climate discussions sometimes harder is those extreme weather events. Like when you have a freak snowstorm in the middle of winter, people go, well, look, it still gets cold. And I just wanted to remark upon that. I think that the fact that it is an extreme event is the part that is out of the ordinary and that we should pay attention to.
Wonderful. Thanks, y'all. So I think we have just 10 minutes left. So we'll try to get through another 2 or 3 questions. There's another good question from Dana Caproni about what are examples of how climate change is negatively impacting marginalized communities more than non-marginalized communities? And I think there's lots of historic examples that we can pull from, as well as things that are unfolding right now.
Yeah, I can take part of this from my own personal organizing. When I first started organizing with a great group called Progressive Maryland, I was the climate justice organizer, and I was tasked with specifically going around communities that surrounded the incinerators in Baltimore and in Montgomery County in Maryland, and doing research around those. So I found that, or rather, other people found, and I learned that the rates of asthma, the rates of like respiratory illness in those areas was significantly worse than in any other parts of the country. And we're seeing things like that. I'm sure we're seeing that in coal specific communities, that we're seeing that in in fracking in Pennsylvania. Like I'm certain that that's true everywhere. And it is in those communities where marginalized people live. Working class people live in those communities because it's cheaper to live where there's more pollution, which is not fair. And who are some of the most working class people? Often Black people, Black and brown people. So that is at least one of the ways in which I have directly noticed when organizing. Most of the people I was communicating with who were telling me their stories were Black and brown people, many Latino people, who just wanted to find a place where they could afford, and it was that place that happened to be hurting them and their children.
Yeah. Elizabeth, would you like to speak to that at all, or?
I was just going to say to the question of coal, that NAACP has a report called the Cold-Blooded Report that I always look to, that has some great data that they have collected similarly that looks at health impacts close to coal plants, specifically looking at Black families. And the data always shows us, right? Folks who are most marginally impacted, folks who are most impacted are folks who are living at the margins of society. And I'm stumbling over my words. I'm sorry. I'm gonna look and see though if I can find the link. And that is what I think the data shows us time and time again. Is this is how this is who the corporations are harming. This is who is struggling, right? When we think of who is, Jean just dropped it in the dropped a link in the chat. Thanks, Jean. This is who's struggling when we think of who has money to move too, right? Who can pick up and go if you've just lost a home, or if you're like, I think of folks not being able to afford things like flooding insurance or fire insurance or that sort of situation. When we think of who can pick up and go, who can afford asthma medicine or trips to the emergency room or that sort of thing, right? There's a difference in the lines there of who gets medical attention and who doesn't.
Also, displacement's another really big one. There are still communities displaced from Hurricane Sandy in New York City. As you all can imagine, New York City's rent prices are outrageous. So having people have to relocate is really difficult. And there's, of course, disaster capitalism. When things happen, I'll never forget Hurricane Irma in 2017 and getting stuck in Turks and Caicos and watching the flight prices go up $2,000. So why is it even remotely okay to essentially subject people to death? People who stayed on that island that couldn't get out could have died. And it's always marginalized people who are disenfranchised, who are low income, and just don't have the resources to get out that will suffer. I see a question here as well about how can I get involved more full-time with community organizing around this? I'm almost done with my master's degree in social work. Congratulations. And this is one of my passions and places to advocate for our communities.
Yeah, well, I'm sure both me and Elizabeth are going to plug our organizations. Well, Sunrise has a number of like organizing trainings that we're leading right now. So to get folks more comfortable with having these like harder conversations with their community members, we're doing like extensive trainings over the next couple of months, and joining Sunrise is the best way to know about those trainings.
I won't argue with that. I'll just say it was a week-long training that first changed my life. It is, I think, for a lot of people that are like, what do I do? What do I do with my anger, with my frustration? There are folks that often said to me when I first joined Sierra Club as a staff member, oh, you have a degree in environmental science, right? And I was like, no, my degree's in peace studies. I studied social movements, and I was studying social movements when I was like, wait, how do you actually do this? And through my university, I had to do a place-based learning program, a practicum, and I got placed with a community organization and went to a week-long training. And then I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to be a community organizer. And so if you're like, how do I make change? There's an organizer out in the world that would love to talk to you and send you a week-long training. The warning is it will change your life and maybe your path. But at the very least, join Sierra Club, join Sunrise, join an organization, whether it's, spending a night a week with a group of people to make phone calls or organizing a town hall or writing letters to the editor. There's something to do now. And for folks that are like, this is it, this is my calling, like there is a place for you in the movement, big or small. Like we need everyone in this.
I think there are just maybe a couple more questions if we have a second. There's one, while there are many elected Democrat leaders that are speaking out and voting against the bills they can, we seem to lack a singular leader to combat this administration. Beyond acting locally, how do we best determine who to most support in the Senate or House, et cetera? Okay. And if we're not able to answer that question, we can maybe follow up with you on that separately, Mike. Because not everyone works on climate policy specifically. Eve, I saw you unmute yourself. Did you have an answer? Or?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a difficult question right now.
Yeah, it is really difficult for sure. We have another question here. Trump said today he's eyeing New England for a new pipeline. Are there any actual physical protests, for example, any sit-ins, blockades planned for the drill, baby drill target areas? And I think you all kind of spoke more collectively, about what kind of actions are upcoming. But if there's anything specific to that question that you all want to answer, please go ahead.
I would just offer it is so hard to keep up with all of the things he says on a daily basis that this is the overwhelming. I think, very purposeful nature of what he's doing is the shock and awe effect of, I'm selling cars on the front lawn. I'm going to tell you I'm drilling. I'm doing this thing now. And some of it is real threats and some of it is nonsense. And so I think there are folks organizing in New England. There are very real pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Line 5 pipeline there's another pipeline, I'm forgetting the name of it, in the east that the folks are trying to fight, that we are constantly with, trying to challenge in court, the folks on the ground are trying to challenge. And so there are ways to get involved against specific pipelines. And what I would say for New England is plug into Sunrise, plug into Sierra Club. If this becomes the real thing, for sure we will be looking for ways to try to fight it. And as he continues to, make threats real or imagined, we will be tracking. And I think one of the things I've heard some of our policy folks say is there's so much, right, from the executive orders of we're changing the name of Denali to we're doing this to public lands, of constantly shifting through the barrage of information to try to figure out where is our stand, where's our fight, and what do we need to work on today. So this is why we are a coalition of so many organizations that can try to figure out what's happening at once and try to keep y'all as up to date as we can be.
Awesome, thank you, Elizabeth. And I think the last question, there was someone that was asking if the general strike that was mentioned earlier will be going across the Canadian border, specifically maybe involving auto workers in Ontario.
That is a great question. From what I understand, it is US specific, but I can't see why Canada shouldn't get involved. I don't particularly have any connections with any Canadian union organizers, but I wouldn't be surprised if something this big did transcend borders.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, y'all, we are 1 minute over. So I want to close us out. Thank you so much, Eve and Elizabeth, for all these incredible answers and for talking to us about the work that you all are doing. I hope everyone learned something today. And I hope you understand a little bit more. I know it's kind of a learning process to really fully understand the intersections of all these different movement spaces, but I hope that today can be a jump off point for you, and that you all can continue to do your own research and reading. And I hope that we can host another follow-up call like this in the future. So as I mentioned, I will be circulating the recording as well as the links that were dropped today, and any additional resources. So don't worry if you've missed them. Other than that, we will be having our next mass organizing call in a couple of weeks. We have not nailed the date down yet, but that one is going to focus more on gender equality, I believe. And then we have a digital defenders training on March 27th that one of my other colleagues will facilitate. So we'll send that information around when we have everything as well. So thank you all again for all these I see so many things in the chat. I'm so sorry that we don't have time to get to everyone, but really, really thoughtful discussion and ideas that you all are presenting. And I just want to remind you all that, have faith and continue the fight. And now you have opportunities to get plugged in and to take all this energy and apply it somewhere. So thank you all again so much. And I hope everyone stays safe and have a good rest of your evening. Thanks, y'all.